So, a fun fact is that I actually started as a music major. And I finished. I have a music degree in bassoon performance. The thing is, one of the reasons I didn't really pursue music and now I more so pursue art is I get really bad stage fright. It doesn't happen when I'm talking in front of people, which is great because I work at Painting with a Twist. So I'm talking and instructing, I'm in front of people. I'm very comfortable doing that. But put an instrument in my hands and have me perform, and all of a sudden I forget everything. When I'm in an ensemble, I'll be fine, even when it's just a woodwind quintet, because I played bassoon, so I'd play with four other people. When I played a solo, I would go on stage and mess up in places that I have never messed up before. New places and weird mistakes that I just don't normally make. And so it took me a really long time to realize that this is a form of anxiety. I'm hyping myself up. I'm telling myself this has to be perfect. And so I'm clutching so hard to the idea that whatever I'm doing has to be perfect that I'm psyching myself out and making myself mess up in places I don't usually mess up. Now, I have noticed that as an instructor at Painting with a Twist, that people will come in, and the people who go in with the expectation that they just want to have fun, they want to have a glass of wine, they want to create a painting, it's not going to be great, but they're going to have a good time, they're the ones who tend to do better. And partially their paintings turn out pretty okay, sometimes really good, but they have a good time throughout the course of the evening or afternoon when I'm teaching the class. So in this video, I want to talk about the mindset that keeps us from being artists. The mindset and the anxiety that make creating art difficult. Playing in the background, I have a Speedpaint. I went on a subreddit called Character Design. People will post mood boards and little snippets about their Dungeons and Dragons characters, and then artists create pro bono work for them. This character is a bard that's supposed to be in like 1905 France, and I thought that was super cool. And I love drawing like violins and instruments and whatnot. So in the background is that. There is a place where I took out some of the footage. I decided I wanted to paint it instead of doing line work. I didn't like that, so I went in and did the line work and then added the color. So if color magically appears, that's why. I find that customers will come in, and if they go into a painting saying, this is going to be a gift for someone, or this has to be exactly like the instructors, they're just going to be anxious through the entire evening. And in my opening speech, I usually address it. And I find if I mention something about having fun and focusing on the enjoyment of painting over the final product, usually that kind of mitigates it. Or it at least gets people not to do guess what I'm thinking, where they huff and puff and talk about their art like, oh, only God can help me now. This is awful. This is horrible. I don't like playing guess what I'm thinking. So I try to make it a welcoming environment so people can say, hey, I don't understand that. Can you demonstrate again? But I find mindset has a lot to do with artistic outcomes. And when we go into a painting with certain expectations, and those expectations aren't fulfilled, we become frustrated or anxious. So when we sit down to draw and say, I'm going to be the best artist, this is going to be a portfolio piece, this has to be the best thing I've ever created, that thought process creates a lot of anxiety. And furthermore, in my experience, having that additional anxiety, the piece usually ends up looking kind of mediocre, like below my average piece. There's anatomical errors, maybe the colors aren't right, the values aren't right. I paint and repaint the same thing over and over. Each time, that anxiety growing, the frustration growing, and it feels like I'm holding on to the piece just way too tight. Now, another issue we run into as artists is we say, I'm not good, or I'm not good enough to draw that, or I want to draw this thing and I do not have the skill or ability to draw it. And so art becomes frustrating and unpleasant and not something we want to do. The problem is, in order to get good at art, you have to create art. It's a skill. It's a combination of knowledge and practice. The same way we can't expect to pick up an instrument and instantly be able to play a difficult melody or a difficult piece, we can't expect to pick up a paintbrush or a pencil and be able to paint like Van Gogh or Monet or Rembrandt. Phrased like that, it sounds really discouraging, like, why do art at all? But then there's always that one little piece, that one little snippet that reminds you why you enjoy drawing. So the question becomes, if we are stuck in, I've tried to create things, but I have failed, how do we get back into art and how do we enjoy art? And if we have the expectation that it's supposed to look like something or come out a certain way and it's not meeting that expectation, how do we change that so that we're not getting flustered? So I think there's a few things that go into this, both the technical aspect and our personal mindset and how we view art and ourselves. So I have found that if I am stuck in the process of thinking this piece has to be fill in the blank here, then the best solution for me is to not focus on the outcome. I don't want to think about, is this piece going to be perfect? Is this piece going to look exactly like the reference? Is this piece going to be worthy of putting in my portfolio? Because that's what's producing the anxiety. So when I sit down to paint, I try to envision some sort of goal. And this helped me a lot as a musician when I would perform on stage. If I focus on an element of the music, the dynamics, the tempo, the rhythm, that gave my brain something to latch onto and kept it occupied so that my brain can't let all the anxiety go through. Hey, that really hard passage is coming up. Hey, that tempo change that we kind of aren't sure on is coming up. And that reduced a lot of my anxiety. So in my painting, I'm not sitting down with the product and the finished piece as a goal. I'm making myself have a learning objective. It also helps if I ask, what if? What if I try a different color? What if I try a different brush? What if? Which gives me a lot of freedom to play around and a safe space that if I mess up, it's okay. If I sit down for a still life, am I going to try to recreate the color as close to the picture as possible? Am I going to focus on getting the form and the angles right in my underpainting so that my overall picture is more accurate? Am I going to work on trying to get more motion in my poses? Recently, I started going back to oil painting, and the purpose in my mind to do these paintings is that I'm going to focus on a few still lives. Still lives are great practice because we're taking simple forms and we're learning how to represent that form on a 2D space when that form is three-dimensional. So if you're painting an apple, you have to focus on the highlight, the shadow, where the darkest part of the shadow is, where the cast shadow is on the table that the apple's sitting on. And if we add the element of color, we now have to worry about how the color changes on the apple, both because there's a shadow from a light source and because part of the apple is a little bit yellow and another part of the apple is a little bit red. Or perhaps part of it's green and part of it's more of a yellowish green and part of it's more of a blue-green. So focusing on a still life with the purpose of I want to learn form, I want to learn better color matching, that gives me something to focus on so that I'm not thinking this has to go in a portfolio, this has to be something that I sell later. The focus shifts from the final product to the process. Now, with the aspect of I'm not a good artist, so I don't like creating art, that's a tough one. In order to be good at creating art, you have to create a lot of bad art. And I feel like there's a few things that get in the way of an artist trying to improve in art. So one is the technical difficulties. So if a young artist is looking for a reference, which is good, and they find a difficult reference, they may not be able to recognize that it's a difficult reference to work from. For example, if you're practicing portraiture and you take a picture of a celebrity, generally that's going to be harder to replicate. Celebrities tend to be in well-lit situations where they have light coming at them from multiple different directions, multiple different lights, and a very soft light. It softens the feature on the face, it makes us look younger, and it removes a lot of the shadows that define the features on the face. So, it is better to look up a reference with something like moody lighting. Some scenes from movies may be easier because there is a single light source on the character and it's a harsh light rather than a soft light, so those forms are much more easy to distinguish. Because if there's a lot of lights, we don't see the shadow at the bottom of the nose where the nostrils are, and we don't see the shadow underneath the nose, which is where we get the sense that the nose is coming off the face because of those shadows. Some artists will find a well-lit celebrity picture and they will begin to copy it and get frustrated. They're like, I can't distinguish the nose from the cheeks, so I'm going to use lines instead of shading because that's the only way I can show that there's a nose coming off of the face. When in reality, the reference that was selected is one that is harder to replicate and one that is not easy to study from. So in part, learning to be a better artist is also learning to pick out references that are easier to learn from. It's one of the reasons that we tend to do master studies. Another portion of this aspect, when creating art feels like this daunting task, like, oh my gosh, I have to do 1,000 drawings before I make a good one. Something that helps me when I'm getting too lost in my own head is to focus on the act of creating art. So before I mention something to focus on, such as color, anatomy, lines, proportions, an element of art, this is being mindful of the creative process. I focus on the sensations. So if I'm a traditional artist, the brush moving across the canvas with paint. And as the paint gets thinner or dries, how it begins to drag across the canvas. Or the feeling of my stylus against the screen, how I'm sitting, my surroundings. I'm focused on this single moment in the creative process, rather than all the thoughts inside my head. And changing that focus from, oh my gosh, I have to do 1,000 drawings, I'm never going to be good at this, to what does it feel like to hold a paintbrush, to move a paintbrush, to move the paint? What does it sound like when my stylus hits the screen? What does it feel like to hold the clay in my hands? That tends to calm those voices and allow me to focus on art and just art. In an interview, the famous cellist Pablo Casals was asked why he still practiced 4 or 5 hours a day despite being in his 80s and having played with many professional orchestras. His answer, I think I'm finally making progress. As an artist, as a musician, it feels like such a daunting task to think of how many years of practice it takes to be good. I mean, imposter syndrome is a new topic, but if we think of that faraway goal, it becomes a daunting task. So rather than imagining the product, it will alleviate much more anxiety to enjoy the process. Thank you for joining me. This is another episode of Unkempt Snuggle Pepper Talks About Art, because that's what my channel does. If you'd like updates on my videos that I'm bad at making consistently, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit the like button. Leave me a comment down below if you've ever had performance anxiety, or if you have art anxiety, or if you found this talk helpful. And I'll see you in the next one.